An elderly woman stood at the pharmacy counter, her hands trembling as she counted each coin under the cold stare of the clerk. Then the clerk casually swept her hand across the counter, sending the coins clattering onto the floor like her dignity meant nothing. No one bent down to help. No one spoke up. Only a heavy, heartless silence filled the room. Until a Navy SEAL stepped forward, his loyal German shepherd beside him, eyes locked on what had just happened. No shouting, no violence, just one firm sentence that made the entire store fall silent. Because justice doesn't always need noise, it only needs someone brave enough to stand up. Where are you watching from? If you believe kindness still matters, like and subscribe. Your support gives us the strength to share more powerful stories. Now, let's begin. It arrived carefully. Late winter had thinned the snow along the sidewalks into gray-edged ribbons, and the sun filtered through a pale sky like something undecided bright, but distant. The pharmacy on Alder Street caught that light in its wide glass windows, reflecting a town that preferred quiet over confrontation. Inside, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and cardboard. Ronan Vale stepped in without ceremony. He was tall, just over 6 feet, with the kind of build that spoke of discipline rather than display. His shoulders were broad, but not exaggerated. His movements economical, deliberate. His tactical combat shirt, olive faded toward gray, carried the softness of fabric washed too many times. The cuffs were worn thin. At the collar, a red thermal layer showed faintly, warmer than the room around him, but his combat pants were the color of old earth, knees scuffed, pockets slightly sagged from use. Old work boots struck the tile floor with a muted thud. His face was clean-shaven, revealing the strong, square line of his jaw and high cheekbones shaped by years of cold wind. His skin was light, but weathered by northern air. His hair dark brown was trimmed in military precision, slightly longer than regulation, but never careless. His eyes were gray-blue, steady, observant. They did not judge. They catalogued. Beside him walked Coda, 5 years old, German shepherd. Sable coat of cream, gray and black blending in layered texture. Muscular without heaviness. Amber eyes alert but controlled. The black harness fitted close to his body, edged in a narrow band of dark crimson. He moved with quiet authority, not pulling, not lagging, simply present. Coda paused as soon as they entered. His ears lifted, not toward the shelves, and not toward the counter, but toward a tremor in the air that humans rarely named. At the front counter stood an elderly woman. Martha Ellery was small in a way that made the world look larger around her. 72 years had folded gently into her frame. Her coat, a pale gray wool worn thin at the elbows, hung loosely over narrow shoulders. A beige knit scarf circled her neck. Strands of silver hair escaped from a careful bun at the back of her head. Her hands trembled, not dramatically, but enough. She opened a cloth coin purse. The sound came first. Metal against glass. Soft. Bright. Unforgiving. She poured the coins onto the counter. They scattered into uneven circles, catching the overhead light. "I'm sorry," she whispered, before anyone accused her. The pharmacy technician behind the counter, her name tag read Alyssa Kane. Did not look sorry. Alyssa was 27, tall and angular, with straight chestnut hair pulled into a tight ponytail that emphasized her sharp cheekbones. Her skin was smooth and pale from indoor lighting, and her lips a practiced shade of matte red. Her posture was impeccable but rigid, as if life had trained her to hold tension rather than release it. Her eyes were brown, quick, impatient. Alyssa had grown up in a household where mistakes cost more than apologies could fix. Her father had lost jobs often. Bills had arrived louder than affection. Efficiency, to her, meant safety. Delay meant chaos. She tapped a manicured nail against the counter. "Ma'am," she said, voice clipped but not raised. "We need exact payment." Martha nodded quickly. "Yes, I know. I counted. I think I'm short by a few cents." Behind Ronan, 2 customers shifted. A man in a construction jacket exhaled audibly. A younger woman glanced at her phone, calculating delay. The coins rolled slightly when Martha's hand shook. Coda's ears angled forward. Ronan said nothing. Alyssa sighed. "It's busy," she continued. "We can't hold up the line." The words were not cruel in volume, but they were cold in delivery. Measured. Detached. Martha began counting again, lips moving silently. Her fingers brushed each coin as if it were fragile glass. One slipped from her grasp and fell. The sound when it hit tile seemed louder than it should have been. No one bent to help. Alyssa's jaw tightened. "We don't round down for prescriptions." "I understand," Martha said, bending carefully, joints protesting. Her breath came slightly faster now. And then Coda moved, not aggressively, not loudly. He stepped forward half a pace and sat beside Martha's leg, his body angled subtly toward her, not the counter. His nose lifted slightly, his amber eyes fixed not on Alyssa, but on Martha's face. His breathing slowed deliberately. Ronan felt it. He knew that shift. Coda was not reacting to tension in the room. He was responding to something biological, an acceleration in Martha's pulse, a chemical spike in the air invisible to everyone else. Ronan stepped forward. "Put it on my card," he said quietly, and his voice was deep, but unforced. Calm. Alyssa blinked. "That's not necessary." "It is," Ronan replied. He placed a worn, military-style watch against the counter as he extended his hand. The watch was scratched, its face clear but aged. Alyssa studied him now. Tall, controlled, not posturing. There was something about men like him she recognized from airport security lines and news footage men who had stood in harsher light than fluorescent panels. She processed the payment without comment. The register beeped. Martha's shoulders dropped slightly. "Oh, I couldn't possibly." "It's handled," Ronan said. He crouched to retrieve the fallen coin and placed it gently back in her palm. "Keep that." As Alyssa handed over the prescription bag, Coda's body stiffened again. This time, not toward Martha, toward the counter, toward Alyssa. His nose flared once sharp, not anger. Recognition. Ronan felt the leash tighten almost imperceptibly. Alyssa's composure faltered for a fraction of a second, barely visible, but her fingers hesitated before releasing the bag. And then it passed. Coda relaxed. But Ronan did not miss it. There was something here, not dramatic, not explosive, but something unsettled. He did not press it. Not yet. The pharmacy manager emerged from the back office at the subtle tension. Mr. Harold Bennett, mid-50s, compact build, thinning blonde hair combed carefully to the side. He wore a navy sweater over a collared shirt. His face carried the mild anxiety of a man who managed complaints daily, but rarely welcomed them. His demeanor was not unkind, just cautious. "Everything all right?" Ronan stood. "Yes, but I'd like to suggest your staff reconsider how they speak to customers." Harold glanced at Alyssa. Alyssa straightened defensively, but said nothing. "We'll review it internally," Harold replied, diplomatically. It was the kind of answer businesses gave when they wished to move forward without friction. While Ronan nodded once, he did not argue. He did not escalate. Martha clutched the prescription bag as if it might dissolve. "I'm so grateful," she murmured. "What's your name?" Ronan asked gently. "Martha Ellery." "And who's the medicine for?" "My husband. Thomas." There was pride in the way she said his name. "He can't come out much anymore. Heart's not strong. She paused, swallowing. "We're waiting on some paperwork. Our assistants got suspended." She tried to make the word sound temporary. Ronan's eyes shifted slightly. "Suspended?" "Yes, something about reassessment. We didn't understand the letter." Her fingers tightened around the bag. "It'll sort itself out," she added quickly, as though reassuring him instead of herself. Coda leaned into her leg again. Ronan knew that tone. He had heard it in men who downplayed wounds. "Do you have a ride home?" he asked. She hesitated. "I walked." It was nearly a mile. The cold was deceptive today, sunlit but sharp, and Ronan nodded toward the door. "We'll take you." Outside, the northern light caught in the edges of melting snow. As they walked toward his truck, Martha spoke in fragments about Thomas's years in a lumber mill, about taxes paid without complaint, about letters that arrived full of words, but empty of clarity. Coda walked slightly ahead now, scanning, steady. Ronan opened the passenger door. Martha turned before climbing in. "I don't know why you stopped," she said. Ronan considered that. Neither did he. Perhaps it was the coins. Perhaps it was the tremor in her breath. Or perhaps it was simply that silence, in moments like that, felt heavier than action. He closed the door gently. The truck engine started with a low rumble. Inside the pharmacy window behind them, Alyssa watched for a moment longer than she meant to. Then she turned away. The sound of coins on glass had faded, but something else had begun, and Ronan could feel it quietly settling into place. The truck moved slowly through North Haven's outer roads, tires pressing through slush that no longer looked like snow, but remembered it. The sunlight remained pale, stretched thin across frozen lawns and bare-limbed trees. Martha Ellery sat upright in the passenger seat, hands folded over the small paper pharmacy bag, resting in her lap, as if it contained something sacred. She smelled faintly of lavender soap and wool long stored in cedar. Her breathing had steadied, but not entirely. There was a fragile alertness in her posture, like someone unused to accepting help. Ronan drove without rushing. Beside the gear shift, his gloved hand rested steady. His gaze stayed on the road, but his mind catalogued small details, the tremor that returned when Martha mentioned paperwork, the way she avoided saying certain words fully. In the back seat, Coda sat upright rather than lying down. His sable coat caught stray light through the windshield. His amber eyes watched the roadside, but his ears shifted occasionally toward Martha's breathing. His body remained still, disciplined, but alert. The Ellery house appeared gradually. It sat near the edge of a thinning pine line, modest and square, painted once in a pale cream that now peeled in flakes. The roof sagged slightly at one corner. One window was sealed with clear plastic taped along its edges. Wind brushed across the siding and found entry where it wished. Ronan cut the engine. Silence settled thickly. Martha stepped down carefully, boots crunching over brittle ice. The front door opened before she reached it. Thomas Ellery stood framed in the doorway. He was 75, tall once, but folded by time into a narrower version of himself. His shoulders sloped gently, his frame lean but not fragile. His hair, a mostly white with faint traces of iron gray, thinned at the crown. He wore a red flannel shirt beneath a brown wool cardigan that had been mended at one elbow. His face was lined deeply, not from bitterness but from weather and labor. His hands, large, calloused, rested against the doorframe for support. There was dignity in the way he stood. Relief came first to his eyes, then something like worry. "You were gone longer than usual," he said. His voice carried the rough timbre of years spent in a lumber mill deep, textured, steady, even when his chest strained slightly between breaths. "I stopped at the pharmacy," Martha answered gently. "We had a little help." Thomas looked at Ronan. He assessed him quickly, not suspiciously, but instinctively. Men who had worked hard their entire lives could read posture the way others read resumes. Ronan extended his hand. "Ronan Vale." Thomas shook it. His grip was weaker than it once had been, but deliberate. "Coda," Ronan added, nodding toward the dog. Coda stepped forward slowly, head lowered in respectful greeting rather than dominance. Thomas's mouth softened. "Good dog." Inside, the house carried the scent of old wood, dust warmed by sunlight, and something faintly metallic from the baseboard heater struggling against drafts. The floors creaked under measured weight. A small kitchen table stood near the window. Papers were stacked carefully in uneven piles, envelopes opened, folded, refolded. Ronan noticed the tape along the window seams. He noticed the faint ripple in the plastic sheet with each gust. Thomas lowered himself into a chair with caution. "Heart doesn't like sudden moves," he said with a faint smile, as if apologizing to gravity itself. Martha set the pharmacy bag down and began pouring water into a glass. Ronan stood near the window. "When did the assistants stop?" he asked gently. Thomas inhaled slowly. 3 weeks ago. Letter said our case was under income reassessment and needed documentation." He gestured toward the papers. "We sent what they asked." "Then another letter came," Martha added. "Said no response received. Benefits temporarily suspended." Thomas's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in humiliation. "I worked 40 years at the mill," he said quietly. "Never missed taxes. Never asked for charity. Now I can't even figure out a letter." His pride had not left him. It had simply grown thinner with his body. Ronan moved closer to the table, scanning the paperwork without touching it. The language was bureaucratic, precise, but hollow. Dates. Deadlines. Codes. Coda walked slowly through the room, nose low. He paused near Thomas's chair. His body stiffened, not aggressive, but attentive. His ears angled back slightly, eyes narrowing as he focused on the older man's breathing. Thomas exhaled again, deeper this time, and Coda pressed his head gently against Thomas's knee. Not playful. Grounding. Thomas blinked. The dog remained still. Ronan watched carefully. He recognized that posture. Coda had been trained to notice physiological stress, the subtle shift in scent when heart rhythm faltered, the quiet spike of cortisol before dizziness. Thomas's breathing had grown shallow without him realizing it. "You feeling all right?" Ronan asked. Thomas nodded, though a faint sheen of perspiration dotted his brow. "I'll fetch the blood pressure monitor," Martha said quickly. She moved with quiet urgency toward a drawer. As Martha searched, a gust of wind struck the house harder than before. The plastic over the window snapped sharply. Coda's head lifted, not toward the sound, but toward the stack of mail on the table. One envelope slid slowly to the floor. No one touched it. It had been buried beneath the others. Ronan bent down. The return address read Department of Health Services, Supplemental Review Division, but the postmark date was older than the others. Thomas frowned. "I never saw that one." Ronan turned it over carefully. The seal had never been opened. A thin crease along one edge suggested it had been caught between pages unnoticed. For a long second, no one spoke. The wind quieted, and something shifted, not in revelation, not in accusation, but in awareness. Ronan placed the envelope gently on the table. "Let's open it," he said calmly. Martha's fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded the letter. The wording confirmed what Thomas had said. Additional documentation requested. Deadline specified. But the date was earlier than the suspension notice. "If we'd seen this," Martha whispered. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. Ronan's mind worked methodically. "Letters can be delayed," he said evenly, "or misfiled." He did not suggest malice. He did not dismiss it either. He stepped toward the window. Cold air leaked in around the taped edges, brushing against his face. He studied the seams. You mind if I fix this?" he asked. Thomas gave a soft, surprised laugh. "You don't have to. I don't mind." Ronan retrieved tools from his truck weather stripping, spare insulation, simple supplies he kept out of habit. Years of deployment had taught him that small structural weaknesses grew into large failures if ignored. He worked without ceremony. Thomas watched quietly. Martha hovered near the table, rereading the letter as though it might rearrange itself. Coda remained beside Thomas, eyes occasionally flicking toward Ronan. "Were you in the service?" Thomas asked after a while. "Yes." "Long time?" "Long enough." Thomas nodded once. He understood what that meant. There were pauses between their words that felt comfortable rather than strained. By late afternoon, the window no longer rattled. The drafts softened. The house felt marginally warmer, not by temperature alone, but by presence. Ronan gathered the scattered mail into neater order. "I have a friend who works in administrative review," he said. "I can ask general questions. No promises." Thomas studied him. "You don't owe us that." Ronan's gaze moved briefly toward the envelope. "I know." Martha folded the letter carefully. "I hate not understanding things," she said quietly. "It makes you feel small." Ronan met her eyes. "You're not small." Outside, the sun dipped lower, turning the sky a colder shade of gold. Ronan stepped toward the door. Coda followed immediately, then paused, turning once more toward Thomas. Their eyes met. Something wordless passed between them, recognition of fragility, perhaps, or shared endurance. Ronan nodded once. "We'll talk soon." Thomas stood again at the doorway. The wind had less room to enter now. As Ronan drove away, he looked in the rearview mirror once. The Ellery house stood modest and quiet against the northern landscape. Not broken, just strained. And strain, Ronan knew, could be repaired if addressed before it hardened into something worse. The truck disappeared down the road. Inside the house, Martha placed the opened letter atop the others, but this time in plain sight. The room felt different, not fixed, but seen. And sometimes that was the first shift that mattered. The road back into town felt longer than it had an hour before. Ronan drove with one hand resting lightly on the steering wheel, the other on his thigh. The northern sun had shifted lower, turning the sky into a pale gradient of silver and washed gold. The fields beyond the Ellery property lay quiet under thinning snow. Nothing in the landscape suggested urgency. Nothing announced that something was wrong. And that, Ronan knew, was how most harm entered the world. Not loudly, but gradually. Coda sat upright in the back seat, gaze fixed forward now. His body had relaxed after leaving the Ellery house, but not fully. His breathing was even, controlled. He had done what he could, observed, grounded, steadied. Ronan respected that. He pulled into the small gravel lot behind a modest brick building on Cedar Avenue. The sign above the door read, North Haven Administrative Services. The structure was functional rectangular, beige brick, narrow windows spaced evenly. A place where forms moved more often than voices. Inside, the air carried the scent of toner and recycled heat. Elias Crowder worked at the third desk from the back. He was 40, medium height, lean but slightly stooped from long hours at a computer. His hair dark blonde, turning prematurely gray at the temples, fell in soft disorder he never quite bothered to tame. He wore thin rectangular glasses and a blue button-down shirt rolled at the sleeves. His hands were long-fingered, restless, accustomed to typing and flipping through files. There was gentleness in him, but also fatigue. When he saw Ronan enter, his brows lifted in quiet surprise. "Didn't expect to see you on a Tuesday," Elias said, standing. His handshake was warm, less firm than Ronan's, but steady. "I wouldn't be here if it weren't necessary," Ronan replied. They had known each other years ago, before Elias chose administration over medical school. He had once told Ronan he wanted to fix systems instead of symptoms. It had sounded noble at 22. At 40, it sounded heavier. They stepped into a side conference room. Coda lay down near Ronan's chair, head resting between his paws, eyes half open but alert. "I need general clarification," Ronan began. "No confidential data." Elias nodded. "Good, because that's all I can give." Ronan described the Ellery situation without embellishment suspension notice, reassessment language, confusion over deadlines. Elias leaned back slowly, exhaling through his nose. "Income reassessment flags increased this quarter," he admitted. "Budget oversight from the state tightened. We've had to re-verify a lot of files." "Automatically?" "Some. Others manually reviewed." "By who?" Elias hesitated, not because he feared Ronan, but because he feared implication. "Mid-level compliance managers," he said carefully. "Yes, we review documentation submitted. If incomplete, cases get marked pending." "And if pending?" Ronan asked. "Benefits pause." The word hung between them. Pause. Ronan studied Elias's face. There was no defensiveness there, only resignation. "How often do letters get misdirected?" Ronan asked. Elias adjusted his glasses. "It happens," he said quietly. "Address formatting errors, postal misreads, internal batching mistakes. Not common, but not impossible." Ronan nodded once. "Are certain demographics flagged more than others?" Elias did not answer immediately. His jaw tightened faintly. "I don't have that data in front of me," he said carefully. "But older cases are more vulnerable to documentation gaps. They don't always respond online. They rely on paper. Paper. Paper that could be delayed, misplaced, overlooked." Ronan leaned back. "Is there a pattern?" he asked. Elias met his gaze. "Patterns don't always announce themselves," he replied. Silence settled. So Ronan left the building with more questions than answers. The sky had shifted again cooler now, the warmth drained from the edges of the afternoon. He drove 2 streets over to a modest duplex with a peeling blue door. Frank Dalton opened it before Ronan knocked twice. Frank was 78, broad-shouldered despite age, with a trimmed white beard and eyebrows thick as frost. His eyes were pale gray, sharp, and watchful. He wore a heavy denim jacket even indoors. A Marine Corps pin rested over his left breast pocket. He had once commanded men in Vietnam. He now argued with prescription refill lines. Vale, Frank grunted in recognition. You hear anything new about your case? Ronan asked. Frank stepped aside. Inside, the living room held a couch that sagged in the center, and framed photographs lining every surface, black and white military shots, faded reunion pictures, a wife long past. They sent me a reassessment letter, too, Frank said. Said my supplemental coverage needed updated income proof. And? I sent it. And? They said they didn't get it. Frank's mouth curved in dry humor. Funny thing is, I mailed it certified. Ronan's gaze sharpened slightly. You have receipt confirmation? Frank walked to a drawer, retrieved a folded slip. Signed for, he said. 2 days before they marked me non-responsive. Ronan studied the paper. He felt it then. Not anger, not yet, but the tightening of a pattern forming its outline. Coda, who had followed quietly inside, lifted his head and looked from Frank to Ronan, sensing the shift. As Ronan folded the certified mail receipt back into Frank's hand, Coda stood suddenly. His ears pricked forward, not toward the door, not toward a sound. Toward Ronan. His amber eyes locked onto him with unusual intensity. Not alarm. Recognition. As if something had aligned. Ronan's chest tightened faintly, not from fear, but from memory. There had been another time, years ago, when paperwork had delayed treatment for a fellow veteran, a man who had joked through pain until he couldn't. Ronan inhaled slowly. Coda held his gaze for 3 long seconds, then lay back down. The room felt heavier, not with revelation, with responsibility. Frank leaned forward in his chair. You seeing the same thing elsewhere? Ronan nodded once. Possibly. Frank's jaw worked. They won't fix it unless someone makes noise. Ronan's voice remained even. Noise can backfire. Frank studied him. You always this patient? No, Ronan said quietly. I learned to be. Outside, wind brushed the siding. Ronan left Frank's house as dusk began to thicken. The pattern wasn't explosive. It wasn't dramatic. It was administrative. It was procedural. It was subtle, which made it dangerous. Back in his truck, Ronan stared at the steering wheel for a moment before starting the engine. He replayed the facts. Multiple reassessment flags this quarter. Documentation allegedly unreceived. Certified mail acknowledged, but case marked non-responsive. Elderly recipients disproportionately affected. Nothing illegal on its face. But something off. Coda shifted slightly in the back seat. Ronan glanced at him in the mirror. You feel it too? The dog's ears flicked. The northern sky dimmed fully now, the first stars faint against lingering cloud. Ronan drove home slowly. Not to solve anything tonight, not to accuse, just to think. His house sat at the edge of town, small, practical, unadorned. He left the porch light off. Preferred the dark. Inside, the air smelled faintly of pine cleaner and leather. He removed his boots, set them neatly near the door. Coda walked to his usual place near the hearth and circled once before lying down. Ronan sat at the kitchen table. He placed Frank's copy of the certified mail tracking number beside a small notebook. He did not write names. He wrote patterns. The difference mattered. He did not want to chase a villain. He wanted to confirm a system drift. He thought of Thomas's measured pride, of Martha's quiet apology for circumstances not of her making, of Frank's receipt signed and ignored. The system did not shout. It delayed. And delay, in fragile lives, functioned like denial. Ronan closed the notebook. He would speak again with Elias. He would encourage formal complaints. He would stay within the law. But he would not look away. Coda lifted his head once more before sleep claimed him. Ronan turned off the kitchen light. The house fell into shadow. Outside, North Haven lay still under northern night. No sirens, no explosions, no headlines, just paperwork moving in quiet loops. And a man who had decided, not loudly, not dramatically, that he would watch where it moved next. The chapter closed not with certainty, but with alignment. Morning came without spectacle. The sky over North Haven held a muted blue, the kind that felt restrained rather than hopeful. Frost traced the edges of rooftops, thin and deliberate. Ronan stood in his kitchen with a mug of black coffee cooling untouched in his hand. He had not slept deeply. Patterns, once seen, did not loosen easily. Across the room, Coda lay stretched near the hearth. His sable coat caught the pale light filtering through the window. 5 years old, strong-backed, disciplined in stillness. His amber eyes opened when Ronan shifted weight, then softened again. Alert, but not restless. Ronan reached for his phone. He did not call Elias this time. He called someone else. Olivia Hart answered on the third ring. Her voice carried warmth layered over professional steadiness. "Ronan? Everything all right?" Olivia was 38, tall and naturally slender, with auburn hair she usually kept tied loosely at the nape of her neck. Her skin held a faint scatter of freckles across her nose. She wore little makeup, none, most days, and her eyes were a clear hazel that tended to sharpen when she listened carefully. She had worked as a community health nurse in North Haven for over a decade. She had seen too many preventable declines. It had changed her, not hardened her, but sharpened her patience into something purposeful. "I need a wellness check," Ronan said. "Thomas Ellery." Olivia paused. "I know the name." "You do?" "He was admitted briefly last year. Mild cardiac arrhythmia, declined inpatient follow-up, said he couldn't afford time away from home." Ronan's jaw tightened slightly. "I'm heading there this morning anyway," Olivia continued. "I can stop by." Ronan nodded, though she could not see it. "I'll meet you." The Ellery house looked smaller in full daylight. Not weaker, just exposed. Thomas sat at the kitchen table when Ronan and Olivia arrived. Martha had laid out 2 cups of coffee she likely could not spare. Her movements were careful, but deliberate hospitality woven into instinct. Olivia stepped forward first. "Mr. Ellery," she said warmly, extending her hand. Thomas regarded her briefly before shaking it. He appreciated directness. Olivia set her medical bag on the table and knelt beside his chair without hesitation. There was something about her posture, open, unhurried, that eased rooms quickly. She listened to his heart, measured his blood pressure, asked quiet questions about medication timing. Coda watched, not anxiously, but with intention. Thomas's pulse, under Olivia's touch, remained slightly irregular. "Are you taking the prescription consistently?" she asked gently. Thomas hesitated. "We've been stretching it." Martha's eyes lowered, but Ronan felt that admission land heavily. Olivia did not scold. She nodded once. "I understand," she said softly. "But we need consistency." Ronan stepped toward the window again, not to fix anything this time, but to feel the air. The drafts had softened since he sealed the seam, but cold still lingered faintly. He turned back. "Thomas," he said, voice measured. "Did anyone explain the reassessment process in person?" Thomas shook his head. "Just letters." Olivia's brows drew together. "That's not standard when there's medical complexity." Ronan filed that away. Later, after Olivia left with assurances she would follow up on medication coverage alternatives, Ronan stayed behind. Martha cleared cups slowly, as though prolonging conversation might hold something in place. Thomas looked toward the small hallway that led to their bedroom. "I hate this part," he said quietly. "What part?" Ronan asked. "Feeling like paperwork decides if I'm worth treatment." The sentence hung between them. Ronan did not answer immediately. There were too many ways to respond poorly. Instead, he walked to the front door and examined the hinges. One screw sat loose. He retrieved a screwdriver from his truck without comment. Thomas watched. "You don't have to keep fixing things," he said. Ronan tightened the hinge deliberately. "Sometimes small repairs prevent bigger ones." Thomas studied him. "You always this steady?" Ronan paused. "No." He rested back on his heels. "There was a time I wasn't." Thomas waited. Ronan did not share the whole memory, only its outline. "After I left the service," he said evenly, "I filed paperwork for post-deployment medical review. It took 6 months. During that time, a man I knew waited on his own claim. He kept saying it would clear soon." Thomas did not interrupt. "It didn't," Ronan finished. The room grew quiet. Martha placed a folded dish towel on the counter and looked at him differently now. Not as a rescuer, but as someone who understood delay from the inside. Coda, who had been lying near Thomas's chair, suddenly stood. Not abruptly, but with focused intent. He walked toward the hallway leading to the bedroom, paused, then turned back and looked at Ronan. Not toward Thomas, toward Ronan. His amber gaze held something deliberate. Ronan rose slowly and followed. Inside the small bedroom, light filtered through thin curtains. A dresser sat against the wall, modest and worn. On top of it lay a neat stack of unopened mail separate from the kitchen pile. Coda nudged the edge lightly with his nose. One envelope slid forward. It bore a different return address. Supplemental Compliance Review. Case Manager, D. Mercer. Ronan stared at the name. He had heard it once before, in conversation with Elias, casually mentioned among compliance managers. He did not open the envelope. He did not need to. The alignment was subtle, but unmistakable. He turned back toward the hallway. Coda walked beside him. The house felt smaller now, not claustrophobic, but concentrated, as if the truth had moved closer. Ronan returned to the kitchen. "There's a separate correspondence from a case manager," he said evenly. Thomas frowned. "We didn't realize there were different offices." Martha pressed her lips together. "Is that bad?" "No," Ronan replied. "It just means layers." He did not accuse. He did not dramatize. But something in his posture shifted, barely perceptible, but firm. He stepped outside briefly, inhaling cold air that stung lightly at the back of his throat. The northern sky stretched open above him, vast, indifferent, clear. He had learned in another life that anger burned hot and fast. Steadiness endured. Inside, Martha folded the new envelope carefully. Thomas leaned back, exhausted not from exertion, but from accumulation letters, forms, uncertainty. Ronan returned. "I'll speak again with Elias," he said. "About process, about documentation." Thomas nodded slowly. "You're doing more than most would." Ronan met his eyes. "I'm doing what someone should have done before." Martha's gaze lingered on Coda, who had resumed his place beside Thomas. "That dog," she said softly. "He seems to know things." Ronan glanced down at him. "He listens." Outside, wind moved across pine branches. Not harsh, just present. Ronan tightened his watch strap slightly, a small, unconscious habit when decisions settled into place. He would not storm offices. He would not make accusations. He would collect structure. And structure, if flawed, would reveal itself. Thomas stood slowly again at the doorway when Ronan prepared to leave. His breath remained slightly uneven, but steadier than before. "Thank you," he said. Not loudly, not dramatically. Ronan nodded once. On the drive back into town, he did not turn on the radio. Coda lay down this time, resting fully. The sun climbed higher, and melting small edges of frost along roadside fences. There was no headline, no confrontation, only layers. And Ronan, patient enough to peel them. The chapter did not end in resolution. It ended in recognition. That loyalty in peacetime looked less like heroism and more like persistence. And persistence, when applied quietly, could alter the course of things long before anyone realized they were shifting. The state office building in Millbrook stood taller than anything in North Haven. Not imposing by city standards, but to a small northern town, 5 stories of gray concrete and mirrored windows felt impersonal enough to intimidate. The flag out front moved stiffly in the late winter wind. Ronan parked beneath a bare maple and stepped out slowly. His olive tactical shirt caught the cold light, fabric worn thin at the seams. The red thermal beneath it showed faintly at the collar. His boots struck pavement with quiet certainty. Beside him, Coda moved in measured alignment, harness snug, black with dark red trim, faintly visible against sable fur. Ronan had scheduled the meeting formally. No accusations, just a request for clarification. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and paper. Fluorescent lights hummed above, and a receptionist directed him to the 4th floor. Daniel Mercer waited in a small conference room. He was 45, tall but narrow-shouldered, wearing a navy suit that fit precisely. His hair was dark brown, combed back neatly, a subtle recession beginning at the temples. Clean-shaven. His jaw was angular but not harsh. His posture was upright, composed, though tension lived in the tightness around his mouth. His eyes were slate blue. They carried calculation. "Mr. Vale," Mercer greeted, voice smooth but restrained. "I understand you've requested general discussion about compliance review procedures." Ronan sat across from him. Coda lay beside his chair, head resting near Ronan's boot. "I'm not here to accuse anyone," Ronan said evenly. "I'm here to understand patterns." Mercer folded his hands. "Patterns," he repeated carefully. "Yes." Mercer leaned back slightly. "Shun's quarterly audits require us to reassess cases flagged for incomplete documentation or financial variance. It's procedural. And how are cases flagged? Algorithmic review, supplemental manual oversight. By you? Among others." Mercer's tone never rose. It never needed to. Ronan studied him, not looking for guilt, but for fracture. He saw fatigue. He saw defensiveness. He did not yet see malice. "How many elderly cases were flagged this quarter?" Ronan asked. Mercer's lips pressed together briefly. "I can't provide specific numbers." "Are they disproportionately represented?" Mercer paused again. "The elderly often fail to respond digitally. That increases documentation delays." "Delays that suspend benefits." "Yes." Mercer did not blink. The air in the room felt dry. Ronan leaned forward slightly. Certified mail confirmations were received in at least one case, yet benefits were marked non-responsive. Mercer's jaw tightened a fraction. "Mail intake is processed separately from compliance review." "Who oversees that intake?" Mercer hesitated for less than a second. "It's a shared responsibility." Ronan held his gaze. He had interrogated men before. He had watched them lie under brighter lights, Mercer was not lying, but he was protecting structure. Coda's head lifted suddenly, not toward Mercer, toward the far wall. There was nothing there, no sound, no visible shift, but the dog rose to a seated position, posture alert, ears forward. Mercer's eyes flicked toward him involuntarily. Just a flicker. A muscle along his jaw pulsed once, then stilled. Ronan noticed. Not the dog's movement, Mercer's reaction to it. It was not fear of the animal. It was recognition of scrutiny. For the first time, Mercer's composure thinned. "Is there something else?" Mercer asked quietly. "No," Ronan replied, but something had shifted, and Mercer felt it. The meeting concluded without raised voices. Mercer offered no admission, no apology, only reiteration of policy. Outside the building, a wind cut sharper than before. Ronan stood for a moment beside his truck. Coda settled back into stillness. "Not a villain," Ronan murmured under his breath. Coda's ears flicked once. Back in North Haven, Ronan stopped at the Veterans Hall on Birch Street. The building was modest brick, square, American flag slightly faded above the entrance. Inside, folding chairs lined one wall. A coffee pot warmed continuously on a metal table. Frank Dalton stood near the bulletin board, speaking quietly with two older men. One of them, Harold Finch, 72, thin as wire, white mustache trimmed neatly, had once served in Korea. His back curved slightly, but his handshake remained firm. The other, Marcus Lee, 68, dark-skinned, broad-faced, calm-eyed, had served stateside logistics during Desert Storm. His movements were slower, deliberate, his voice low and steady. They turned as Ronan entered. "You talked to compliance?" Frank asked. "Yes. And?" "Policy exists," Ronan said evenly. So does pressure." Frank exhaled through his nose. "That mean what I think it means?" "It means no one's stealing money outright," Ronan said. "But documentation flags increase when budgets tighten." Marcus leaned back against the wall. "So they squeeze the quiet ones first." Ronan did not confirm, but he did not deny it either. They spoke for nearly an hour, not angrily, but precisely. Certified mail receipts, dates of letters, phone calls unanswered. Harold described being placed on hold for 42 minutes before disconnection. Marcus described submitting paperwork twice. Ronan listened more than he spoke. He encouraged them to file formal complaints with the Inspector General's office, not as protest, but as process. Frank nodded slowly. "Noise, but organized," he said. "Yes." As Ronan prepared to leave, Pastor Caleb Moore entered the hall. He was 50, broad-shouldered, with graying hair cropped short and a trimmed salt-and-pepper beard. His eyes were warm brown, was lined by years of listening to confessions and grief. He wore a simple wool coat over clerical attire. He had once served as a military chaplain. It showed in his posture, upright, steady, accustomed to crisis without panic. "Ronan," Caleb greeted. "Pastor." "I've heard some concerns," Caleb said carefully. "From Martha, from Frank." Ronan nodded. "I'm not looking to escalate," he said. "Nor am I," Caleb replied gently. "But community meetings can clarify misunderstandings." Ronan studied him. Caleb was not confrontational. He was connective. "Maybe," Ronan said. Caleb placed a hand briefly on Ronan's shoulder. "You carry things quietly," he observed. "It's efficient." Caleb's eyes softened. "Sometimes efficiency needs witness." The words lingered. That evening, Ronan returned home. The sky was deep indigo now, stars sharper than before. Inside, he removed his boots and sat at the kitchen table. He spread out notes, not names, but dates. Flagged cases. Letter delays. Certified receipts. Case manager references. He did not circle Mercer's name. He underlined process. Coda rested nearby, chin on pause. Ronan leaned back. Greed did not always wear cruelty on its face. Sometimes it wore compliance. Sometimes it wore exhaustion. Sometimes it justified itself in spreadsheets. He did not believe Mercer woke each morning intending harm, but intent did not erase consequence. Outside, wind brushed pine branches lightly. Ronan closed the notebook. He would not storm offices. He would not grandstand. He would gather enough structure that escalation, if needed, would stand on its own weight. Coda lifted his head briefly. Ronan met his gaze. "Quiet," he said softly. The dog blinked once, and lay back down. The chapter ended not with confrontation, but with convergence. Policies. People. Pressure. All tightening slowly around a truth that did not yet speak loudly, but was becoming harder to ignore. The community hall smelled of brewed coffee and old wood polish. Folding chairs had been arranged in uneven rows beneath fluorescent lights that hummed softly overhead. Outside, dusk gathered slowly over North Haven, the sky streaked with pale lavender fading into steel blue. The air carried the edge of late winter, sharp but thinning. Pastor Caleb Moore stood near the front, hands clasped loosely before him. He wore a charcoal sweater over a clerical collar, sleeves pushed back just slightly. His shoulders were broad, his beard trimmed neatly, silver threading through dark strands. His presence carried steadiness rather than authority, an anchoring kind of calm. Years earlier, he had served as a military chaplain, sitting beside men in field hospitals and listening to grief without flinching. It had shaped him. He did not rush emotion, and he held space for it. Ronan stood near the back wall, olive shirt worn at the seams, red thermal faint at the collar, arms folded lightly, posture relaxed but attentive. He did not take the front seat. Coda lay beside him, sable coat catching the low light, harness snug, head resting between his paws, watching. Martha and Thomas sat in the second row. Thomas had insisted on coming despite fatigue. He wore his red flannel shirt beneath a heavier coat tonight. His face appeared paler under artificial lighting, but his spine remained straight. Martha's small hand rested gently over his. The hall filled gradually. Frank Dalton arrived first among the veterans, denim jacket buttoned tight. Harold Finch followed, cane tapping lightly against the floor. Marcus Lee came quietly, nodding to those he recognized. Then others. Neighbors. A schoolteacher named Dana Holloway, mid-30s, tall and slender, dark curly hair tied back loosely. She wore a green cardigan and glasses perched low on her nose. Her demeanor was earnest, analytical. She had heard from parents whose elderly relatives struggled with paperwork and wanted clarity. A mechanic named Raul Ortega, 42, broad-shouldered, grease permanently embedded beneath his fingernails. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his words came straight and unpolished. They gathered not in anger, but in concern. Pastor Caleb stepped forward. "We're not here to accuse," he began gently. "We're here to understand." His voice carried evenly through the room. Ronan did not speak at first. He watched faces. Martha's quiet dignity. Frank's restrained impatience. Dana's furrowed focus. Raoul's folded arms, skeptical but present. Thomas cleared his throat softly. "We received letters," he said. "We responded. Benefits paused anyway." No one interrupted. Frank followed. "Certified mail confirmed delivery," he said. "Well, still marked non-responsive." Donna adjusted her glasses. "Has anyone requested written explanation beyond standard notice?" A few heads shook. Raoul muttered under his breath. "Systems don't break on their own." Ronan felt that statement land heavily. Pastor Caleb nodded once. "We can submit formal group inquiry," he suggested. "Not protest. Inquiry." That distinction mattered. Coda shifted slightly beside Ronan. Not restless. Listening. As Dana rose to write notes on a portable whiteboard near the front, the marker squeaked faintly against its surface. She wrote, "Documented delays. Patterns?" At that moment, Coda stood. He did not bark. He did not growl. He simply walked slowly, deliberately from Ronan's side toward the center aisle. The room quieted instinctively. The dog moved past chairs, tail level, eyes steady, not seeking attention, not demanding it. He stopped beside Thomas, lowered himself calmly at the older man's feet, not as guardian, as acknowledgement. For a brief second, something shifted in the room. It was subtle, but undeniable. Thomas reached down, fingers resting lightly against Coda's fur. The gesture was small, but it carried weight. Not because the dog had chosen him, but because, in that silent movement, the room recognized what was at stake. Not paperwork, people. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder after that. Then conversation resumed, but deeper now. Ronan stepped forward finally. "I met with compliance review," he said evenly. "Policy exists. Pressure exists." He did not name Mercer. He did not accuse individuals. "Documentation delays disproportionately impact those relying on paper communication," he continued. "We need formal documentation of discrepancies." Dana nodded quickly. "I can help organize written timelines," she offered. "Dates received, dates responded, copies of mail confirmations." Raoul leaned forward slightly. "And what then?" "We submit to Inspector General's office," Ronan replied. Process within process," Frank exhaled. "That takes time." "Yes." Thomas looked toward Ronan. "Time is what we don't always have." Ronan met his gaze without hesitation. "That's why we organize now." The meeting lasted over an hour. No raised voices, no dramatic declarations, just names on a sign-up sheet. Copies promised. Dates recalled carefully. When chairs began folding back into place, Pastor Caleb approached Ronan quietly. "You're not leading," Caleb observed. "No?" "You're guiding." Ronan glanced toward the veterans cluster near the door. "I'm listening." Caleb smiled faintly. "That's leadership." Outside, night had fully settled. The air felt colder again. Ronan walked Martha and Thomas to their car, borrowed from a neighbor for the evening. The vehicle was old, engine reluctant, but functional. "You didn't have to come," Ronan told Thomas quietly. Thomas shook his head. "I needed to." Martha squeezed his hand. "We're not alone," she said softly. But the words felt fragile, but true. Over the next several days, North Haven shifted, not loudly, but steadily. At the Veterans Hall, Dana organized timelines with meticulous handwriting, color-coded tabs marking receipt dates and responses. She approached it like grading papers, precise, patient. Raoul offered to scan documents at his shop after hours. He claimed the scanner was better than anyone's home machine, though he rarely admitted generosity outright. Harold Finch called two acquaintances who had faced similar issues. Marcus Lee helped draft a clear statement template for formal submission. Pastor Caleb opened the church basement for meetings if needed. Olivia Hart stopped by the Ellery house twice to monitor Thomas's vitals and coordinate medication assistance through a short-term emergency program. Her calm reassurance steadied Martha more than she realized. Ronan moved quietly between houses, collecting copies, verifying dates, encouraging written, not verbal complaints. Coda accompanied him each time, presence constant. One afternoon, as Ronan returned home with a folder tucked beneath his arm, he paused on his porch. The sky carried the faintest hint of early spring in its color. He heard laughter from across the street, a neighbor's children playing in melting snow. It struck him then how fragile stability could be. A single delayed form, a paused payment, a skipped prescription, none dramatic in isolation, but cumulative. He entered his house and laid the collected documents across his kitchen table. Coda lay nearby, head tilted slightly as Ronan sorted pages. Certified mail copies, case numbers, notice dates, response confirmations. He stacked them carefully, not as ammunition, as evidence. The next morning, Pastor Caleb posted a notice on the community board outside the church. Community documentation submission. Friday, 6 p.m. No accusation, no blame, just process. That evening, as Ronan sealed a large envelope addressed to the Office of Inspector General, he felt no triumph, only alignment. He had not accused Mercer publicly. He had not stormed offices. He had done what the system itself required: document, organize, submit. He glanced at Coda. The dog's eyes were calm. No alertness now, just steady presence. Outside, wind moved lightly through pine branches. Not harsh, not forceful, just persistent. Ronan placed the envelope near the door, ready for morning mail. The chapter did not end in resolution. It ended in momentum, a town deciding quietly that confusion would not go unanswered. And sometimes, that decision was enough to begin altering the course of things long before outcomes were visible. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning. There was nothing dramatic about it. No certified stamp this time. No bold red markings. Just a standard state envelope resting in the Ellery mailbox beneath a sky that had begun to soften toward early spring. Martha found it first. Her fingers trembled as they always did, but today the tremor carried something sharper than uncertainty. She stood for a long moment on the small front step, wind tugging lightly at her gray coat before going inside. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, a folded newspaper in front of him he hadn't yet read. "Another one?" he asked. Martha nodded. Ronan stood by the sink. He had stopped by early to check on Thomas after Olivia's last visit, boots placed neatly by the door. Coda lay near the table, amber eyes following the envelope with quiet interest. But Martha opened it carefully. Paper unfolded with a soft crackle. Thomas watched her face rather than the letter. Her eyes scanned once, then again, and then her shoulders lowered, not in defeat, in release. Thomas's voice grew tight. "What does it say?" Martha swallowed. "It says, benefits reinstated. Effective immediately. Documentation received and verified." The words landed softly in the room. No trumpet, no applause. Just breath returning where it had been held too long. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. His chest rose, steadier than before. Ronan did not smile broadly. He simply nodded once. Coda rose slowly, walked to Thomas, and pressed his head lightly against the older man's knee. Thomas's hand rested on the dog's neck. "About time," he murmured. Later that afternoon, Ronan drove into town. The investigation report had not come directly to him, but Elias had called. "Official review concluded," Elias had said earlier, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone still inside the system. Procedural misclassification. Policy application inconsistent with intake documentation. Case manager reassigned pending internal review. Reassigned, Ronan repeated. Yes. No criminal charges, no headline scandal, but structure corrected. When Ronan stepped into the small administrative office to retrieve a formal summary copy requested by Frank and the others, he noticed something different in the air. Not tension, not hostility, just caution. Daniel Mercer stood near the copy machine. His navy suit appeared slightly looser than before, as if sleep had been inconsistent. His eyes met Ronan's briefly. There was no confrontation, no bitterness. Just acknowledgement. Mercer approached. Your concerns were documented, he said evenly. His voice held less edge now. Ronan studied him closely. Policy changes? Ronan asked. Intake verification protocols updated. Dual confirmation required before suspension flags. Mercer's jaw tightened faintly, not defensively, but in acceptance. I followed pressure, he added quietly. It wasn't enough to question it. Ronan did not accuse. He did not console. Pressure reveals priorities, he said simply. Mercer nodded once. There was no hatred in his expression. Only fatigue, and perhaps a thin layer of humility he had not worn before. Ronan left without further words. That evening, as Ronan stepped out of his truck in front of the Ellery house, he noticed something unusual. The windows no longer rattled faintly in the wind. The plastic sheet had been replaced with proper glass installed earlier that afternoon by Raoul and 2 volunteers from the Veterans Hall. Coda stood still for a moment, ears lifting, not in alertness, in recognition. The house felt different. Not larger, not richer, just sealed. Ronan paused at the gate. The northern wind moved through the pines softly. For a brief second, he felt something he had not expected. Not victory, not satisfaction. Relief, not for himself. For the house, for the people inside it. The feeling was subtle, but it lingered longer than he anticipated. Inside, Martha poured tea into mismatched cups. Thomas stood near the window, looking out as though testing its sturdiness with his gaze. It doesn't whistle anymore, he said with a faint smile. Olivia sat at the kitchen table as well, reviewing medication notes. Her auburn hair caught the warm light. She looked up as Ronan entered. Vitals stable, she said quietly. Now that dosage is consistent. Frank arrived shortly after, denim jacket still zipped despite warmer air. Harold Finch followed, leaning less heavily on his cane than before. Marcus Lee came last, quiet as ever. Pastor Caleb entered with a gentle knock, removing his coat carefully before stepping inside. The room grew full, not crowded, but complete. Dana Holloway stood near the counter, holding a small stack of printed documents, the official policy update announcement sent statewide. She adjusted her glasses. It's not flashy, she said, but it's clear. Intake confirmations required before suspension. Raoul leaned against the wall, arms folded, satisfied but restrained. Took long enough, he muttered. Thomas looked around the room. All this, he said softly, over a letter. No, Pastor Caleb corrected gently. Over people. Ronan stood near the doorway. He did not step forward to speak. He did not need to. The warmth in the room came not from a heater, but from alignment. Not anger, not spectacle. Process. Persistence. Community. Coda moved through the room slowly, accepting brief touches from those he passed. His harness glinted faintly under light. He stopped once more beside Thomas. Sat. Amber eyes steady. Thomas bent down carefully and pressed his forehead briefly against the dog's. "You listen better than most," he murmured. The room quieted slightly at the gesture. Ronan felt it again, that subtle shift. In war, his victories were loud, measured in ground taken, in enemies subdued, in missions completed. Here, justice had arrived quietly, through forms, through signatures, through meetings in folding chairs, through people who decided not to ignore what felt wrong. Ronan stepped outside briefly as the others spoke inside. The sky above North Haven had shifted fully into spring's first promise pale gold, streaking across open blue. He leaned against the porch railing. The wind no longer cut sharply. It moved with ease. Coda joined him moments later, sitting beside his leg. "You feel it?" Ronan asked softly. The dog did not respond in human ways. He simply remained. Steady. That was enough. Inside, laughter rose lightly for the first time in weeks. Not forced, not brittle. Real. Ronan did not return immediately. He let the sound travel through the open doorway. He let it settle into him. The chapter did not end in triumph. There was no banner hung across town. No ceremony. Daniel Mercer remained within the system corrected, not destroyed. Policy shifted. Benefits reinstated. Windows sealed. Medication steady. The northern wind softened. And Ronan understood something he had once struggled to name. Justice, when done correctly, does not roar. It adjusts. Quietly. And when it does, the world rarely applauds, but it breathes easier. The house behind him no longer breathed through cracks. Neither, for now, did the system. Sometimes miracles do not split the sky or arrive with thunder. Sometimes they arrive as a steady hand on a shoulder, a letter corrected, a neighbor who refuses to look away. We wait for signs from heaven that shake mountains, but more often, God works through ordinary people who choose courage over silence, patience over anger, and compassion over convenience. In this story, there was no dramatic rescue. There was persistence. There was dignity. There was a town that decided paperwork would not outrank people. And in that quiet decision, something sacred moved. Perhaps that is how grace often enters our daily lives, not as spectacle, but as alignment, as a door fixed before the storm worsens, as medication restored before a heart gives out, as someone standing beside you when you thought you were alone, as if this story reminded you that faith is not always loud, but always present. Share it with someone who needs that reminder today. Leave a comment about a moment in your own life when help arrived quietly but changed everything. And subscribe to this channel if you believe stories like this deserve to be told. May God watch over you and your family. May He protect your home from unseen storms. May He send the right people into your life at the right time. And may you recognize the quiet miracles when they come. Stay steady, stay kind, and trust that no act of goodness is ever wasted.